There was a time when Suge Knight was one of the most intimidating, sometimes downright terrifying men in hip-hop. His death grip over Death Row Records meant he wielded considerable clout in the industry. But one man he could never intimidate or stare down was 50 Cent. 50 took the hip-hop scene by storm, and a number of factors ensured that not only was he never intimidated by Knight, but there was also a very real possibility that the former Death Row CEO was scared enough to back down. Suge Knight's rep. Suge Knight already had a pretty eventful life by the time he crossed paths with 50 Cent. Marion Hugh Knight Jr. was born in Compton, and when he was a child, he was given the nickname Sugar Bear, which inspired his performer name. Knight had a promising football career, but never went pro. He instead transitioned into the role of a concert promoter, and his massive frame meant he was the perfect fit to be a security guard for celebrities, with a client list including singer-songwriter Bobby Brown as well. It is here that I want to take a second and emphasize the fact that Suge essentially built a career off bullying and dominating everyone from artists to producers and even the founders of other labels. The first artist to feel Knight's wrath was none other than Robert Van Winkle. You may know him better as Vanilla Ice. Just a couple years after Suge Knight left football behind and moved into music, he launched his own music publishing company. The next year, in 1990, Vanilla Ice dropped Ice Ice Baby. You may have heard of it. The song did do pretty well. While Vanilla Ice undoubtedly enjoyed a ton of success because of the song, he had to give a big piece of the pie to Suge Knight. While everyone associated the song with Ice, it was actually written by Mario Johnson, who happened to have been signed to Suge Knight's agency at the time. This meant that Ice signed over the royalties from the song to Knight, but the road getting there wasn't an easy one. In the weeks they were negotiating, Knight reportedly approached Ice a number of times with his bodyguards in tow. There was even a nasty rumor floating around that Knight had forced his way into Ice's hotel room and hung him over the balcony by his ankles. For a while, this rumor was just that, a rumor, but it was Ice himself who put those suspicions to rest. Back in 2001, Xenon Pictures released a documentary called Welcome to Death Row, which chronicled the rise and the fall of the record label. While conducting research, the production house was able to conduct several interviews with people linked to either the label or Knight himself. In an excerpt released from one of the many interviews that were conducted, Vanilla Ice explicitly stated that Suge Knight definitely did not dangle him off the edge of a balcony. He said, "He didn't hang me off any balcony, okay?" The story's kind of been blown out of proportion, and I want to clarify that Suge and I have no bad feelings towards each other. Knight had led Ice out onto the balcony to talk about the royalty situation, and while he was intimidated, Knight did not get violent with the singer. Regardless, it's a little crazy when you think about it. A number of people in the industry were willing to accept that rumor as truth, just because the rep Suge had built himself in a few years. Death Row. Suge was making big moves on the West Coast in the 90s, and through the DOC, he got access to the most talented members of the beloved NWA. A couple of things worked in Suge's favor at this time. The DOC didn't just want out of NWA, he wanted to part ways with their record label as well. Ruthless Records. Run by Eazy-E, getting out of his contract and aligning with Suge was not going to be easy. But DOC was helped by the fact that around the same time, Dr. Dre wanted out too. Enter Suge. While it was never officially confirmed, NWA's manager, Jerry Heller, revealed that Suge threatened Eazy-E with lead pipes, forcing him to let DOC and Dr. Dre out of their contracts. Even if that was what happened, the rappers were okay with it. They aligned with Suge to become the co-founders of Death Row Records. Before I get into Death Row's meteoric rise, I want to take a second to talk about why Dr. Dre left NWA and Ruthless Records in the first place. This is because Dre will eventually play a big role in Suge and 50 Cent crossing paths. Dre first signed with Ruthless Records in 1987, and as head of production, he spearheaded a bunch of projects that were really successful, essentially making bank for the label. But all the success came at a cost to Dre. He spent months on end usually managing multiple projects with a never-ending list of things to do. As time passed and he repeatedly knocked it out of the park, Dre felt like he was being a little shortchanged by Eazy-E and Ruthless Records. The thought of potentially leaving the group and the label was pretty much off the table until Ice Cube did just that in 1989. Once he opened that door, there was no closing it. As Dre's frustrations with Ruthless Records grew, Suge and the DOC swooped in to push him over the edge. Both men had claimed that they had gone over the label's books with a lawyer and arrived at the conclusion that Heller and Eazy-E were pretty much screwing Dre over. It was at this moment Dre decided to leave NWA behind and join DOC and Suge to form their own record label. Dre and DOC were already established players in the game and had money to spare to fund the label. But what about Suge? Remember how he shook down Vanilla Ice to get royalty points? Well, he used that money to get Death Row Records going. Suge quickly got Death Row off the ground by having the label handle the music for 1993 1992's Deep Cover. The title track for the movie not only shined a brighter spotlight on Dr. Dre, but also introduced the world to his protege, Snoop Dogg. Soon after, they began working on Dre's first album, The Chronic. When the album dropped, it completely changed the game. It went triple platinum and sold almost 6 million copies worldwide. Dre took shots at Ruthless Records, went after Eazy-E, and Snoop Dogg used it as a platform to become a big star in his own right. At the same time, it established the West Coast as a force to be reckoned with. Death Row took things to another level in 1993 when Snoop dropped his first solo album, Doggy Style, which went quadruple platinum and was universally praised, just like The Chronic had been. The next couple of years were interesting for Suge and Death Row, as he began feuding with a couple of people. Meanwhile, representations of the gangsta lifestyle were under the microscope. This was made all the worse by the fact that Snoop Dogg was charged with first-degree murder around the time Doggy Style came out, and Suge was at the center of a civil rights activist campaign against gangsta rap. 66-year-old C. Dolores Tucker went after Time Warner because one of their subsidiaries handled distribution for Death Row Records. Suge was understandably furious, as was the rest of the label. So when Tucker approached him about releasing positive hip-hop music, whatever that means, Suge said no. It didn't matter that Tucker said she could convince Time Warner to put up $80 million to make it happen. While all this was going on, Suge's rivalry with the East Coast Sean Combs escalated to a point where Combs needed bodyguards after he received death threats from gangsters linked to Knight. While all this conflict carried on, Death Row was gaining more and more notoriety. It was around this time, Suge went after the biggest fish of them all, Tupac. Shakur was in prison in 1995, and the story goes that his mother was on the verge of losing her house. So Tupac and his wife get in touch with Suge in LA, who quickly sent Tupac's mom $15,000. A couple of months later, Suge visited Tupac in prison and posted his bail for $1.4 million, presumably under the condition he was signed with Death Row Records upon his release, which was exactly what Tupac did. He had a pretty stellar run with Death Row, as the East Coast-West Coast war continued to escalate. I'm not going to get into detail about that here, because it was Dr. Dre's actions that had the biggest impact on the Suge and 50 feud. Dre wasn't the biggest fan of the direction Death Row was headed in. Sure, they had a ton of success together, but Suge's inability to resist conflict and the escalating war between the coasts meant that Death Row Records' reputation was far from the best that it could have been. Suge was becoming increasingly out of control, and Dre believed that creating some distance may be best for them. Sure enough, Suge was arrested for violating his parole and was sent to prison around that time. Dre broke away from Death Row Records in 1996, forming his own record label, Aftermath Entertainment, which was a subsidiary of Interscope, just like Death Row had been. At this point, not only did Dre make himself an enemy of Knight, but in light of everything that could have happened recently, Tupac turned on him as well. There was a lot of excitement surrounding Tupac's initial work with Death Row Records, but the rapper very quickly began to realize that working with Suge Knight was not a good idea. The rapper didn't make nearly enough when compared to the volumes of money he brought in for the label and Knight. It had been suggested that Tupac wanted out of Death Row, but was stuck for two reasons. First, he owed a lot to Suge, who helped his mother keep her house and who got him out of jail on bail. Secondly, there was a feeling that Tupac was attracted to the thug life, and he could stay closest to it by remaining aligned with Suge. He was also immensely loyal, so when it came time to turn on Dre and stick up for Suge, that was exactly what he did. Eminem and 50 Cent. Aftermath Entertainment wasn't interested in pumping out track after track. Instead, it positioned itself as a boutique label, prioritizing quality over quantity. Considering the troubles that Dre had with Ruthless Records and Death Row to a lesser extent, this made perfect sense. However, things did not start off on the best foot. The label dropped Dr. Dre Presents The Aftermath in November 1996, signaling Dre's transition out of gangster rap and his involvement in the Coast Wars. The album was certified platinum by the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA, but it did not end up being all that popular among fans in the long run. In the next couple of years, Aftermath was involved with a couple of stinkers and failed to make much of an impression, which led to widespread rumors that the label may be running out of money after multiple commercial duds. Then things began to change for the label in 1998. Jimmy Iovine, the co-founder of Interscope, was good friends with Dr. Dre and suggested the music producer and artist take a look at an up-and-coming talent named Marshall Mathers, better known as Eminem. Dre immediately knew that M was a special talent, so he signed him to Aftermath and got to work on an album. The album will be Eminem's debut LP, the Slim Shady LP. Dre had a really hands-on role, producing 3 of the tracks and lending his vocals to 2 of them. The album was immensely controversial and massively successful. Eminem became a superstar practically overnight, and the LP marked Aftermath's first major success as a recording label. But that wasn't all. Dre also dropped his album, 2001, which went 6 times platinum. The album marked a return to form for Dre, proving he was still a force to be reckoned with. At the same time, Aftermath's reputation grew and and the label's early failures quickly became a thing of the past. While Dre got pulled into a bunch of lawsuits in the following years, Aftermath as a whole was doing great. They took things to the next level in 2002 with the arrival of 50 Cent. Eminem found 50 impressive, so he flew him out to LA to meet Dr. Dre in the hopes of signing him to the label. Just like he had with Eminem, Dre saw the potential in 50 and signed him to a $1 million deal and got to work on his debut album. In February 2003, the label dropped Get Rich or Die Trying, which was described as probably the most hyped debut album by a rap artist in about a decade. The album was a massive success. It sold nearly 900,000 copies in its first week and went 9 times platinum in 2020. It was around this time that Suge Knight and 50 Cent first crossed paths, and the Death Row co-founder quickly learned 50 was not going to be intimidated. 50 Cent and Suge Knight. Between Tupac's death and Suge Knight's time spent in prison between 1996 and 2001, Death Row Records was really struggling. In his time away, Dr. Dre and Aftermath Entertainment emerged as his biggest competitors. In 2002, 50 Cent was the hottest name in the hip-hop world, and Suge knew he had to meet this man face to face. While 50 Cent was shooting the music video for the immensely successful In the Club, the mood changed when it was announced that Suge Knight had arrived on the set. Sure, Knight had always been an intimidating figure, but things had gotten much worse in the last few years. There were a number of rumors that implicated Knight not only in Tupac's death, but Biggie's as well. It was widely believed that Knight orchestrated Biggie's hit to get any heat off of him, but none of this was ever confirmed. Anyway, combining all of that with his pre-existing reputation meant that pretty much no one wanted to see Suge Knight show up, especially unexpectedly. D12's Bizarre was there to see the interaction between 50 Cent and Suge Knight. The Death Row co-founder pulled up with nearly 30 men in tow and walked right up to 50, as the young star's entourage essentially disappeared. Though there were reports that Eminem wanted to get in there and ensure his friend was safe, but he shouldn't have worried, as 50 Cent was unfazed. He stepped right up to Knight and his goons and asked him what he wanted. Suge didn't do anything. He just took a puff of his cigar and left. This was clearly meant to intimidate 50, but it didn't seem to work. To this day, no one really knows why Suge was at that set, though it has been alleged that part of him was worried Dr. Dre had brought 50 Cent into the fold to take down Suge. But after one meeting, he quickly discovered that 50 Cent could not care less about him, even if he tried. Once Suge left, 50 Cent just went back to making one of the greatest music videos of all time. There was something really important about 50 Cent that Suge Knight failed to understand before he met him. 50 had been to hell and back before getting to work with Eminem and Dr. Dre. I'm going to get into that in just a minute, but first, you should know that when 50 Cent signed with Aftermath, everything about the way they conducted themselves changed. Everyone in the crew had a bulletproof vest and they traveled with bulletproof cars. Crew knew that with 50 Cent on the roster, they were living in dangerous times where anything could happen. Making 50 Cent. Like a lot of his peers, 50 Cent, whose real name is Curtis Jackson, had a pretty difficult childhood. His mother was a drug dealer and died when he was just 8. After her passing, Jackson was raised by his grandparents. From the age of 12, Jackson himself stated that if he wasn't in school, he was probably at the gym or selling crack. Yep, Jackson was a preteen drug dealer and would often bring his product along with a couple of guns to school. As he got older, he really didn't stray from this life. Jackson got arrested a week before his 19th birthday for selling cocaine to a person who turned out to be an undercover police officer. He luckily avoided going to prison though, as he could have been put away for at least 3 to 6 years with ease. Instead, he was sent to a boot camp for half a year, where he earned his GED. This was when Jackson decided it was time to turn things around for himself before it was too late. He adopted the name of 50 Cent, which he saw as a metaphor for change. In 1996, a friend introduced Jackson to Jam Master Jay of Run DMC. Jay recognized the interest Jackson had in creating a music career, so he taught him all the essentials of creating hooks, choruses, and fine-tuning song structure. I'm not going to get too much into detail about Jackson's early work, but as 50 Cent, he was drawing the attention of all the right people. After Cent dropped the immensely controversial yet hilarious How to Rob single, he was on the radar of guys like Jay-Z, DMX, and the Wu-Tang Clan. He was even asked to go on tour with Nas for Nostradamus. But around the same time, tragedy struck, as 50 Cent was shot 9 times at close range and was left for dead. Cent was shot in the hand, both legs, his chest, hip, and through his left cheek. But somehow, miraculously, he survived and made a full recovery in about 5 months. The hit had been carried out by Darryl Baum, Mike Tyson's close friend and bodyguard, but the heavyweight boxer didn't actually have anything to do with the shooting itself. It has been alleged that Kenneth McGriff, referred to as a crack kingpin, was behind the hit, who wanted retribution after 50 Cent exposed aspects of his criminal past in the song. After surviving such a difficult childhood and beating death at its own game, 50 Cent became a man who was impossible to intimidate. Suge Knight, with his reputation, cigar, and hordes of men, could do nothing to have Cent so much as break a sweat. Fallout. According to rumors, this wasn't the only time Suge and 50 Cent crossed paths. Apparently, Suge pulled up with a bunch of guys who had burners while 50 was alone. But again, he was not going to be intimidated. He just leaned back into his car, turned around with an Uzi to protect himself. Knight backed down once more, and his interactions with 50 Cent were emblematic of a much bigger problem. His reputation and credibility were rapidly falling apart. Suge only spent a couple of years on the outside before winding up behind bars in 2003 once more. He continued to maintain control of things behind bars, but his focus wasn't actually on getting Death Row Records back on top. Instead, he launched smear campaigns against all the rappers he was beefing with, most notably Snoop Dogg. He even managed to cut ties with Corrupt, who had given Suge more chances than he arguably deserved. Suge was in and out of prison, promoting new artists and stirring up beefs, but did not manage to get a single album released during this time. If I wind back the clock a little, Death Row Records didn't really do all that much in terms of discovering new artists once Tupac passed away. The record label made a ton of money by releasing 2 of Tupac's albums posthumously, and they spent a lot of time remixing and re-remixing Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg songs from their time with the label. But these were all short-sighted moves, and Death Row Records wasn't really doing anything to discover or build new stars. Death Row Records' financial issues also compounded every single time Suge Knight went to prison, and there was no denying that his behavior became more erratic and unpredictable after his disastrous interactions with 50 Cent. Things went from bad to worse in 2006 when Suge Knight and Death Row Records both filed for bankruptcy. By then, Suge spent more of his time in prison than outside of it. Death Row had no big names or major releases, and almost no one in the industry wanted to be associated with Knight. Suge owed his creditors about $120 million by the time he filed for Chapter 11. His list of creditors included the IRS, Interscope Records, and a bunch of artists who had previously been signed to the label. Death Row Records was dead. Suge spent the next few years repeatedly getting into trouble, but things really came to a head in 2015. In January of that year, he crashed his car into his friend Terry Carter, who died, and also nearly killed a filmmaker named Clee Sloan. Suge claimed he acted in self-defense, but nearby witnesses all stated that he followed the two from the set of Straight Outta Compton and intentionally ran over both men. To make a long story short, Suge was sentenced to 28 years in prison, and as of right now, he's an inmate at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He has no shot at parole before October 2034. 50 Cent has had a better go at it over the years. While he arguably never reached the heights of Get Rich or Die Trying again, 50 Cent remains a household name. Still, he has his fair share of trouble. He filed for bankruptcy a few years ago, but was able to bounce back pretty well, even performing at the Super Bowl halftime show recently. Suge Knight was a thug and a bully who managed to make the right connections and consolidate power. He was always on the edge of resorting to violence to get what he wanted, which earned him his reputation, but also ensured that as time passed, fewer people would want to work with him. It would only be a matter of time before someone refused to back down from him. That someone was none other than 50 Cent. New to the scene, Cent should have been an easy target, but he wasn't just any man. Their interactions marked the beginning of the end for Suge, who had already been playing with fire for a long time. The big man came unraveled, lost his record label, lost what little respect or fear his peers had, and now he will spend the foreseeable future behind bars. 50 Cent just stuck to doing his own thing, and he has ensured that his name will be remembered far more fondly than Suge Knight's. The two men's brief interactions proved that Suge knew 50 Cent was different, and his fears were confirmed time and time again. He had met the one man who would not be intimidated by his shtick, and that is why Suge Knight was scared of 50 Cent. And that's our video. If you enjoyed it, check out one of these boxes too. I'll catch you in the next one.